Bonjour. As an English speaker, it's only polite, right, for me to try a bit of French. I'm sorry. Ça va? Okay, that was just a test to see if you are a responsive audience. And you passed. Well done. Of course you're all right, aren't you? You're at a conference. It's always fun being at a conference. I, however, am speaking at a conference, so I've been better. What's the French for shitting myself? Sorry, did someone, what was it? What is it? I can't say that, but thank you. I'll follow up later. I was also told to say, pardon my French if I swore, because you thought it'd be funny. I knew it wouldn't be funny. Thought give it a go. Never mind, that one fell flat. Thank you, Fabrice, for the wonderful intro. I think I'm an angel. We'll see. We'll let you decide. But no pressure, right? I have to make this funny now. I don't think I'd planned for that, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm Bex, and you may or may not know me from other positive, upbeat talks, such as sex, murder, rape and apps, is tech subverting the word good, and stop saying disruption. I have to give you a content warning for my talk. I haven't pulled any punches on this, and some of what I talk about you might find upsetting. People say to me, Bex, why are you so cynical and angry all of the time? And to those people, I just can't help but say, why on earth are you not? I've been working in tech for about 15 years, I think now, and for 7 of those, I've worked exclusively in designing services, products, and technology that will help create a positive social change in the world. So to give you some examples of what I work on, that means that I've helped create resources for tutors to teach basic digital skills to those who are being excluded from important online services because they don't have those digital skills. I've worked with an organization who wants to encourage people to consume less technology so that we aren't creating dangerous landfill. Shout out to the previous speaker. And I've also worked with an organization who is determined to reduce the amount of human trafficking that happens online by working with some of the internet's major platforms. And I've worked on web apps that are designed to help rape survivors through the painful process of reporting their assault to the police. This is my day-to-day work, so I can't help but get angry sometimes that these are even problems that exist in the first place. Being angry genuinely made me better at everything, except maybe making friends. And I'll explain why. My nan loved the phrase, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with this or if it's a British thing, but my nan used to say it all the time. And I do agree with her on some level. You know, harmless day-to-day chat, it's really important to keep that in mind. For example, I wouldn't just walk up to somebody and say, your hair's really crap. That'd just be really mean, right? And also, there are really a lot of things that piss me off, so I can't really go around complaining about them all. I just don't have the time for it, right? And it just wouldn't be appropriate, and that whole making friends thing would become even harder than it already was. However, if something is important, I think we should all be standing up and expressing our anger, because without this kind of attitude in the world, we get inertia, right? Nothing happens, nothing changes. To show this, I've created this, what I call the flowchart of meh. So there's something a bit rubbish, everyone gives it positive feedback because no one wants to be mean. And the outcome, that terrible product still exists. So instead, what I'd prefer is the angry innovation flowchart. You see something that sucks, and then either you research and design something better, or you might speak to the right people who can change things. And then the outcome, it doesn't suck anymore. Amazing and scientific. But I do agree that we can't get angry at everything because of energy, because of appropriateness. So I've developed this Venn chart to help us through that. I call it the diagram of helpful and appropriate anger. So obviously we have a circle here that displays anger. So you've got anger at something's making you really, really annoyed. But that's useless on its own, and again, leads to the lack of friends thing. So what we have to also have is knowledge about the issue. If you don't understand the problem space, it might mean that you're angry for the wrong reasons. And then finally, you have to take action to help. Otherwise, what's the point? So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to present to you some projects that I've personally worked on and some of the things that have really annoyed me about them. But first, I just want to talk about a guy that I often meet when I'm giving a talk like this. Let's, for the sake of this story, call him Josh. He's been working in tech, or maybe he's just graduated, and he thinks he's really smart. He loves to challenge me because it makes him feel really big. At some point in the conference, usually at the after-conference drinks, he'll find himself somehow stood next to me with a pint, and he'll say, Bex, but what even is good? What does good really mean? And I say, shut up, Josh. You know what? It is hard when you overthink it. Moral philosophy is a really confusing place. There isn't one way to define good according to these theories. I looked up good in the Oxford English Dictionary, right? There are 20 different ways of describing good. That isn't normal for the dictionary. You only get one or two. 20 different ways of describing good. It is complicated. Poor Josh. And there are no universal ethics. It depends on our upbringing, our culture, and our worldview. It's especially complicated when we think about social good. Long-term improvement can be impacted by short-term help. Systemic issues are very hard to untangle. That's why we call them wicked problems. It's political, and we're not supposed to talk about that, apparently. But this is really important. I'm not your mum. You learn at a very young age the basic premise of good and harm, and you do know deep down what's wrong and what's right. Honestly, though, let's be honest with ourselves, maybe you're deliberately trying to ignore it because of some underlying guilt of the products that you're working on, or because maybe you really like money and success. That's okay. Lots of people like money and success. It's what we're taught to value. And the first step to recovery is recognition. So I think we all need to agree on what we mean by good for the rest of this presentation, or we'll get nowhere. So I like to say this, and most people can agree that we want to do less harm in the world, right? Yeah? Can we agree that maybe doing less harm is kind of a good thing and we don't need to overcomplicate it? I personally focus a lot of my thinking on power. Who has it? Who doesn't? Who's left behind because of the work that we're doing? Does it already make people who are already comfortable more comfortable? Well, that's nice, but it's maybe not particularly impactful on the grand scheme of things. Although I have many examples from the wider technology sector where products have failed society, Airbnb, Spotify, sorry to the previous talker, and every other tech product probably as well. We're not going to talk about them because you can find articles of them 10 a penny on the internet. There are a lot. So there's no point me talking about them, and I don't have personal experience of the decisions that have been made internally at those products. So instead, I'm going to talk about two projects that I personally worked on. I can't name any names, but they are real projects, I promise. I'm going to get a drink of water. I don't know how anyone does a 40-minute talk without a sip of water, because you don't want to hear me with my dry mouth for the rest of the talk. Okay, so the first project I'm going to talk about. A few years ago, I worked for a sexual health clinic, and they had a service designed to help teenagers think about their sexual health. The people in the clinics themselves needed more face time with those who had really critical issues. And they were really struggling to find that time. So we designed an online triage system designed to get those critical people into the clinics and stop the people who didn't need to be in the clinics going to the clinics. While we were doing that, we found quite a few edge cases during the research and design phase. You all use the term edge cases. I presume you do. Those cases where very few, if any, of them will come through a system. In a commercial product, you probably wouldn't design for these edge cases. Accessibility issues usually get put to one side because of the costs it takes to design for them, and they are usually edge cases. Not many people will come through your product that need that stuff. However, in the social goods sector, these edge cases become what we call crisis cases. Profit isn't the main driver for dealing with these cases, and they're usually people who need support the most, even if there are only a few of them. And it becomes our responsibility to make them safe. In the instance of the sexual health clinic, one of these crisis cases was, what if a 12-year-old was asking for a pregnancy test? Sure, we could just give them a pregnancy test and get on with our lives, but something illegal has happened for a 12-year-old to become pregnant, and it's illegal for good reason. Is it our responsibility to protect this user? My answer is yes, absolutely. And I've seen plenty of people come up with excuses to not design for this sort of user. Sometimes they say, it's not my problem, I'm just a designer. Sometimes they blame their boss, they blame the client, they blame the budget. But I'm just going to share this quote by the Lorax, which is a character from a children's book, if you didn't know. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Because what we create shapes the world. So I'll share my second story. A few years ago, I worked with a support center who helped those who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. It was a physical building, and they'd reached capacity, but they knew more people needed help, so they looked to tech to scale their support service. After a little bit of research, we found that the most valuable thing in this center was the peer-to-peer support network. So it was the people in the building supporting each other, actually, to overcome the addiction that was most supportive to them. So we wanted to see if we could replicate this online. So we set up a WhatsApp group, and we put a few people from the center into that WhatsApp group just to see what would happen. We chose those who are less at risk, so those who are in the later stages of their recovery. Maybe not the most perfect research, but the most safe type of research we could do with this user group. A researcher watched them for a few weeks. What do they do in the WhatsApp group? And it worked. They were supporting each other. And we found loads of other stuff that was really helpful for the development of our product. But the main thing that we found was that safeguarding was key. These online spaces needed moderating, just like the physical space had support staff there who were making sure that everyone was okay and safe. These online spaces also needed moderation. We knew that it was important that two people having a bad day should not be placed together in that chat. Depending on the individuals, it could be a suicide risk. People could die without safeguarding in place. I always talk about people dying if we get things wrong in my sector. It's not being flippant. It's very real. Before we carry on with my stories, I just want to talk about money. Again, something we're not really supposed to talk about, right, in the grand scheme of things in the world. We don't talk about religion, politics, or money, but all three are important in my work. In order to make impact, we need it. Just like if we were working in the commercial sector. We need money to pay for time, resources, and whatever else it takes to build a product. And we need to make sure that the products we build are financially sustainable. Imagine if we created that support app for suicidal addicts, and they started to use it and depend on it, and then all of a sudden, oops, we ran out of budget, we've got to shut it down. That would be incredibly irresponsible, right? But we also find that sometimes there's a clash between what can create the most impact and what can help create a financially sustainable product. For example, right, let's take normal tech financial models, right? SaaS, we sell it on to a charity. Maybe we build a product for charities that might help support their service users. We sell it to the charities, either with a monthly retainer, maybe we give them the IP, we sell that to them. That's one way we could make money with our product. Or we could charge at the point of the user, right? That's kind of general tech models of making money. Great, it makes money, it makes a more sustainable product, but what it also does is reduce the amount of people who can access that product, and those who are most likely to need it most don't have the money and budget to buy that product. So we've got a real catch-22 there. It's a tough situation that no one's really solved. We could look to other forms of funding, and I've got about 6 I could list. VC funders, they only want growth and exit, which isn't good for an impact product. Grant funding is usually not big enough to sustain a product, and that's where you cut corners. I know a lot of agencies, design agencies, tech agencies like mine, often do pro bono or free work for charities in this space, but they leave it to last and they cut corners, and they only really do it because it gives them PR. There are ways to fund things, but it becomes a difficult space, and sometimes we do the bare minimum for maximum profit, or we cut corners because there wasn't enough money there in the first place. Maybe we don't create a solution for that 12-year-old girl because the budget didn't stretch. Maybe we release that addiction recovery app without safeguarding. You might say, that would never happen. I would never let that happen on my product. But I've seen each and every one of these examples play out in real life. I'll end this rant with a Kurt Vonnegut quote because I'm a massive cliche. We could have saved the earth, but we were too damn cheap. I have a friend called Tom. He runs a waste tech startup, exciting space. I've become really interested in rubbish since meeting him. It's called Disposal. And he always says to me, it's people. People are the problem, which honestly I 100% agree with. I moved from doing evil in the commercial sector, spending my days making rich people richer, and I moved into the social sector, maybe naively thinking the world would be full of fluffy bunnies, unicorns and rainbows, and we'd all be best friends. The reality is that there are still a lot of the same issues that we can't get rid of. Money and greed is one I've already talked about, and another is ego. I've seen many people's egos ruin many potentially good projects. Those privileged entrepreneurs who think, and they are usually privileged, not just saying that to be a dick, who think their idea will save the world. They think they can create an app for raising money for people who are experiencing homelessness without actually understanding the people who are homeless or ever speaking to a homeless charity who have spent decades understanding the problem space. Honestly, I met a guy the other day, a tech entrepreneur, and he was absolutely lovely, honestly, really, really liked the guy, and he was well-meaning, but he compared the refugee experience to when he went backpacking on his gap year. And that tone was so off that I facepalmed through the entire conversation. Back to that homeless project that I was talking about, I have seen many, many iterations of this homelessness idea over the years. And they don't work, right? So instead of understanding the complex social issues and stigma that's in place in this sector, in the homelessness space, they just focus on sticking a QR code around somebody's neck so people can scan them and donate. Or, even worse, I've seen a dating-style app where you can flick through profiles and choose the least offensive homeless person to give your money to. I don't know if you can possibly imagine how demeaning it is for the people involved in that, but also the long-term issues that will arise eventually. The arrogance or ignorance of these sorts of people to think they can just bypass the charity sector and make a blockchain to solve a social issue is astounding. I love their tenacious nature. I love that they care. I love their passion. I love how bold they want to be with these products. But most of all, I love their money. Wherever they got that from, they should just take it and give it to someone who knows what they're doing. There are plenty of people trying to solve this issue. Give it to them. If when I said charities, you got a little bit of a, ugh, but charities, they pay their CEOs far too much, and they're not very well organized, don't give money to them, they're not going to be able to solve it, we know better. If you did think anything like that when I mentioned charities, I think you really need to rethink your perception of them. They're different in every country, admittedly. When I go to America, I have to talk about charities in a completely different way. And I don't have time to talk about it now, but there is a TED Talk that I recommend anybody watches who wants to challenge their own beliefs around charities. It's called The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong by Dan Pelota. Ego and bias are something that we all have. It's human nature. It's absolutely normal to have them. It's fine. Don't beat yourself up too much about it. But it can be hard to receive that negative feedback because of these things. If you're building a product and you're really passionate about it and you love it, I've found that founders, particularly, very difficult to get them to think in a different way about their product. So instead, we have to create safe spaces to have critical discussions. One way of doing that is called the red team. I think it's really fun. You have a red team and a blue team, and the red team has an idea, and the blue team comes along and rips it apart. Deliberately. It's quite fun. It's well used in the journalism space. Have a look at it, see if it might work for your product. Another tool I really, really like is called the Ethical OS. I use it a lot in product team working sessions. and it helps you scan for the potential negative consequences your product might have on the world. So you can design against them, right? So you can stop them happening before you even build a prototype. I also like the idea of an ethical specification. You know, you have a technical specification, a functional specification. What about an ethical one for every product that you build? I know someone who always adds the environment as a persona to every project that they do. I think that's pretty cool. And these are just a very small handful of potential tools and techniques that you might use to make sure that your product is more responsible. There's so many toolkits and books and thought pieces. I don't know how is no longer an excuse. I used to be an avionics engineer. I like to say that, it makes me sound cool. But I realized I was a pacifist, so I had to leave that work. But they design knowing that humans are fallible, knowing that humans make mistakes all the time. They design deliberately for human error. They assume the worst of us. But that's what makes air travel safe. Aren't you glad that they do that? So why don't we do that? Lots of us, if we're honest with ourselves, have a tendency sometimes to maybe be a bit of a jerk. Let's just assume that that's our default and design against it. Designing for social good doesn't mean taking the models, platforms, and thinking that we use in the commercial sector and plonking them on top of a social problem. We talk about frictionless, right, all the time in the design industry. We want to add friction, often, in social issues. Monzo, very, very good example of adding friction. They have a gambling block, so they stop people from spending money. Banks like people spending money. They stop people from spending money. Deliberately, friction is added to stop people from spending money because they care about the impact that they're making on the world. We add friction a lot in this space. We go against our usual ways of designing. Emotion, we try our best not to use it too much if it becomes manipulative. All these things that we're taught are very different in the social good space. It's really complicated, and I also think that the day-to-day toil of understanding the humans behind the problem can make some of us angry. It can be really hard working in the space. And I think it isn't about being perfect either. We're all still working through how difficult it can be to make the right decisions on a day-to-day basis on our projects. But we can't start making those decisions without, starting somewhere. So I think it's okay to start somewhere. So to wrap up, yes, I can be a cynic. And I can be angry. But I'm angry because I have hope. I'm hopeful that things can get better if we get angry and fix things. Thank you.
You have lots, Bex. So you have several questions, actually. The first one is, Bex, does anything matter anymore anyways?
Does anything matter anymore anyways? Who's the nihilist in the room? Yes or no? Doesn't have to. Do you want it to? It's a really philosophical question. I thought it was going to say, Bex, what even is good? So thank you for not asking that question. I'm not really going to answer that question. That's one for you to answer, ponder on your own over a glass of wine. Bit philosophical for me.
So the second one, and actually I think it's really good questions. Are you the drawer of your slides?
Yes, I am. They're not very good. Sorry.
They're not good? You kidding me? Who thinks our slides are great? Don't be so humble. No. So the third one, do you have solutions to address the problem on funding and raising for good products?
Really good question. So I tackle the issue at its cause. In the UK particularly, grant funding is the main way we tend to build products for social good, initially anyway. So I work with funders to address how they fund technology. So they tend to fund charities. They won't fund me as a for-profit agency, but they'll fund a charity. So we work with the charities to find out what their needs are for technology. And you know what? It's really funny because we talk about blockchain and all these big things. Charities just need a website. They just need a website, and funders won't fund that. They'll only fund innovation, and they'll only fund small pots. So I'm working with them to think more long-term about technology funding and remove some of the need for innovation. One of the products that I talked about, the support, peer-to-peer support service, was grant funded, and the grant funder really wanted innovation and really wanted us to work agile. They'd heard the word agile, and they wanted us to do sprints, but they thought that meant releasing everything we did every sprint, and that was why that product got released. It got released without the safeguarding, and that was because the funder was pushing for it. So I left the agency that did these projects because of that sort of behavior. I would have pushed back on the funder. You can push back on funders, but because people want more money from funders, they don't say bad things to them. They're too nice.
Very clear. Could you talk a little bit more about the ethical specifications?
Yeah, I haven't really tried it out yet. It's just an idea I've had. I really firmly believe that there are a lot of principles out there. I don't know if anybody's had a look at any sort of ethical tech principles. There are lots of them. And I don't think you can just do a set of principles for everything. I think they're a really good starting place, but the problem is a lot of them are done in silo. So there's one that's been released by some of my colleagues, and it's really good. I think it's called Design and Climate Principles. So it looks at how we might build technology and design in a way that's sustainable for the environment. But when we've tried those principles on projects in practice, they clash with other ethical considerations. So in one project that we tried it on, we really wanted the servers to be the most sustainable they could be, but privacy was the main ethical concern for this product, and the most ethical servers weren't the most private servers. So we had to compromise on environment because privacy was the key thing for that project. So that's why I like the idea of project by project specifications, because every project is different and will have different ethical needs. The users will need certain things that are very different per project and per product. So yeah, I like the idea of looking at it per project rather than like an overarching set of principles. I don't think that works.
So this Pascal was interested by knowing if you had one very actionable advice that could be used in our day-to-day job as product managers, designers, marketers, what would that be?
Really good question. And I guess at the point of my talk, I don't want everyone to go away now. If anyone was inspired by that and it's like, I want to do social good products, you don't all have to go away and build a social good product or go and work for a charity. I think the biggest change actually can be made in big organizations and startups who are just building day-to-day normal comfortable tech, right? That isn't necessarily going to change the world, because a lot of technology has a negative impact on the world. It does, if you really dig into it. Or it excludes people, or it includes people it really shouldn't include. And thinking about those things, I think having people who are thinking more responsibly in that space and scanning for future consequences is really, really important. So tip 1, stay where you are. And tip 2, try and create those spaces. It depends how open your organization is to these discussions, and this is the difficult thing, isn't it? Because time is money. So try and create time and spaces to challenge the thinking. So that red team exercise is a really good one. It takes half a day if you need it to. Get 3 people from another team to come and interrogate your thinking and your new product and your product release. Another little tool that I didn't talk about, it's a bit contentious and we don't know whether it works or not yet, but there's something about the 7th generation principle. So you're supposed to think 7 generations away from now, who will this affect? So that's what I think Airbnb could have done. Used that ethical OS. You thought 7 generations in advance and gone, oh, actually, rich people are just going to buy up all the houses and rent them out and bypass health and safety laws. They could have quite easily come to that conclusion if they gave themselves the space to interrogate their own product from an ethical perspective, thinking about the future. Seventh generation principle is tricky because we can't possibly imagine what happens in 7 generations' time. So most people say 5 generations is a little bit more realistic. That we're all still trying to figure this sort of stuff out and whether these tools work, but I think thinking about the future impact of your product and using future casting stuff is great.
We have 2 questions which are pretty close in a way. One from Anna and one from someone called Anonymous. Is it possible?
Is it Josh?
Is it possible to combine ethical design and profit-oriented solution? And the other one is, money making is still an issue in real life for public services. How you manage to find a product-led solution that could help?
I'll start with the profit one. So I think we are all inherently a little bit greedy as humans. I don't think we can help it, right? You get the opportunity to make more money and you take it, and it's really hard to stop yourself from doing that. So I really believe in protective business models that don't allow for excess profit. I really believe in that. So I am very keen on things like B Corps, social enterprises, charitable organizations, because it stops you from taking too much profit out. In a way, they're not perfect, but they start to design against human fallibility. So my answer is no, but maybe. I think Disposal, my friend Tom, who thinks that people are the problem, was originally a profit-making organization, and Tom and Sophie, who run it, are the most ethical, responsible people I know in the world. And they have a profit-making business, and they absolutely would not abuse that power. And I think they're the only 2 people in the entire world I would trust not to abuse power of money. I made my own organization. I ran my own agency and set it up before I moved to Snook. And I was in the process of setting up all the limits of taking money out of the business that I possibly could, so that I could never be tempted. And isn't it easy just to take away the temptation, right? So no, is the short answer.
So money making is still an issue URL for public services. Have you managed to find a product-led solution that could help?
On public services, sorry, I don't ask me the question again.
It's really on public services.
Public services. So we work a lot on public services at Snook. We work with the government. We have secret level government clearance, which always sounds cool. And yeah, I mean, we see that as social good anyway, so we apply a lot of the same rules. It can be difficult because it's so bureaucratic that we struggle sometimes to properly implement some of the things we would like. So some of these spaces where we pause and reflect and, add money to build protections into things don't happen as much as maybe we would like, purely because of bureaucracy and sometimes budget. There's no money in the government either. Yeah, so I think it's the same thing really in some ways.
Okay. You worked in different countries. Did you see any cultural differences when it came to charity and social good?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. It's not a blanket rule. America, because it doesn't have a welfare system, is very dependent on the charity sector. Lots of people give to charities more willingly because they know that it's needed. Very different to the UK, where we have a welfare system, so people assume that that covers things, which it doesn't. There's a lot of charities in the UK that deliver very important services, and I believe they should be at the forefront of tech for good because they have the subject knowledge. The technology is the easy bit. The hard bit is decades of understanding how to solve a complex social issue, which the charities on the whole tend to have. Different in Norway, basically no charity sector at all there because they have a very heavy welfare system. So it is covering a lot of the social issues. Yeah, very different per country.
You say that people are the problem, but what do we do about that practically? Kill everyone or? Kill everyone.
Yeah, I've considered that. No. I just think we all need to be individually responsible for our own reflectiveness and assume that we are a problem. I assume that I'm terrible and awful and a problem, and that doesn't make me feel awful on a day-to-day basis. I don't dwell on it. I just take it as a known. It's just known that I could be a better human and that we all could be. And I think it's really hard to reflect. I don't know why I became so reflective, but I think saying things out loud that we used to be and how we overcome them and how we changed can be really powerful. I grew up in poverty in a space where my parents maybe were a little bit sexist, maybe a little bit homophobic, maybe a little bit racist. So I grew up in that environment, and I was too. And I think saying that out loud, I think we all are, because of the way that society is. And I think saying that out loud is the first step, and recognizing that will help us be better designers. And I think it's very hard for people to say that. It's very hard for me to say that on a stage full of people looking at me. But I think that's what we all need to do. I think we all need to admit to ourselves where our flaws are and how that might impact any work that we're doing. And it's the only way to reflect, to be really honest, even if it's scary.
How can people train their skills to work on social good projects? Should it be a position even as a volunteer in something? Do you have an advice on that?
Oh, really good question. There are people, just read all the books. There's like 100 Tech for Good books out there now talking about this, and I think that's where I started. I just read everything that comes out. The scene is changing a lot. We do a lot of behavior change now. I think if you have behavior change skills, that'll really set you in good stead, and systems change is really important in this space. So yeah, there's a lot of books. Read all the books. Listen to all the talks. There's conferences. Go to them. Or this one with me. Or hire me.
I actually wrote one, if you're interested. No publicity. Oh, no, sorry. And last one, do you think that potential solutions like Web3, blockchain, initial coin offering, all the things like that, could be a way to raise money for impact in a way?
I mean, yeah, fundraising isn't my speciality, as you may have noticed. I'm always struggling to fund my projects effectively. So maybe, yeah, and I don't know much about blockchain either. It sounds awful and ruins the environment from everything I've heard. But, actually the conversation about new technology is really interesting because, metaverse, right? Have you all heard what's going on in the metaverse? People are being sexually assaulted, and there aren't laws about it yet because it's not real, but it is when it's sexual assault. So a lot going on in the new technologies that hasn't been scoped. No one's done that consequence scanning exercise of what might happen, who are the bad actors, who might do bad stuff on this, and how are we going to protect against it. No one's done that for the metaverse, or if they have, they've done it very badly. So I think that's a good question. How do we look at new technologies coming out and design them in a way that's more responsible?